Hello, Internet. My name is Chamomile.
And I'm Requiem. Sorry about
Okay.
missing last time.
Yeah, you just missed Fortuna. But
Oh,
we need to have a talk about the monkey's paw.
what about?
So, while Fortuna was on the show, she said that your second wish on the monkey's paw was that all of the side effects should happen to me and not you.
That doesn't sound like me. Look, Fortuna and I are like enemies going way back. Obviously, she lied to you to try to drive a wedge between the two of us and bring you over to the darkness.
I mean, I did feel like I was on pretty good terms with Fortuna, but she does seem to disagree, so...
You can't believe, why would I ever do that? Have I ever, gotten you involved in, dark occult stuff that has ended up backfiring on you?
I hate to bring up the Jade Empire playthrough again, but yes. And I mean, that was just the big one.
I mean, yes, and there was also the time I strapped you down and forced you to watch Possibly in Michigan 10 times, but that was just because I wanted to see if it was actually cursed.
I mean, I feel like you're making my point for me. I was going to avoid bringing that up, just at least on the air. But if we're getting into it, there's also the time when you sent me a bunch of coupons for that Needful Things store, and told me not to Google it, and I didn't. And I feel like I probably should have.
They were good deals. Yes, were you briefly a Wendigo? Yes. But I got you down eventually.
I mean, I feel like the only positive that really came out of that long term is that ownership of my soul is now such a legal clusterfuck that I don't know if anyone's going to be able to collect.
See, everything I do, I'm looking out for your best interests.
That's not really the direction I was going with this.
It's fine. It's, look. Do you want me to give you Fang Requiem's phone number? Will that make up for this?
Oh my god, he has a phone?
He does.
I had always assumed that he was just too, mysterious and vampiric to have a phone. But, yes, absolutely. Just send me that and all is forgiven.
Alright, I'll send you Fang Requiem's phone number.
Alright, so we are going to try doing a tournament on camera and see how it goes. We need to do these either on camera or off because we need that XP. But I'm 50-50 on whether or not this is worth doing on camera, so we're gonna figure out empirically.
I mean, it's if it's just Heartless, there's not a ton to talk about additionally, is the thing.
Yeah, now, 3 out of the 4 tournaments are just, there's 10 entrants, including us, so 9 fights. And, the Heartless groups are relatively small, especially early on. So, plus each tournament does tend to have at least one character battle in it, although it is usually just a fight with a cool character. So, basically, audience, don't be surprised if this is the last one we do, because this is an experiment, and it may fail, and honestly, the fact that we are now 2/9 of the way through this, and so far all we have talked about is the meta concept of doing it, is, that is perhaps not a good sign.
Is this going to be a non-episode, then?
Nah, I mean, I think it'll be fine. Mainly because, this is... this is going to be pretty short. Like, I do not anticipate this taking more than 10 or 15 minutes from here. Provided I win on the first time through. If I lose on the final fight, then we're just walking away from it, and I'll come back and do it later off screen. Yeah, I mean, we are like 4 minutes into the episode right now, so... It's hard to tell exactly how long, because we left it recording while we went and, like, grabbed something to drink. So I'm not sure exactly how deep into the episode we are, but I believe it is about 4 or 5 minutes. While we are just fighting mobs of Heartless, though, I will say the Heartless have a really good enemy variety to them, which is an absolutely vital and yet sometimes underappreciated aspect of game design.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're all very distinct and adorable.
Yeah. They're all very distinct, they're all very adorable, and there is a lot of variety in, like, how they behave. Like, these monkey guys are noticeably more agile and a little bit harder to keep track of compared to the regular little soldier guys with the little helmets. These large bodies are, the big ones, are great little mini-bosses. They are super annoying to fight in large quantities, but alone, or even just accompanied by smaller Heartless, they are a little two-stage boss fight, they change their moveset halfway through their health bar. Early on, they're a fairly simple, in their first stage, it's a fairly simple of just avoid their big heavy swings, get behind them, and smack them there, because their armored fronts are immune to damage. And then, in their second phase, they get a little bit more agile and aggressive, and you have to deflect their charge, or just block it with your face. But,
I like how the little wizard ones kind of look like the Black Mage from Final Fantasy. I just like the whole creature made out of darkness thing. Like, there should be more creatures where it's like, it's just made out of darkness. It's got no facial features. It's just darkness.
But with adorable little eyes, though.
With adorable little eyes, of course. Originally it's just a stylization of the Black Mage having his face covered, but I think in Final Fantasy X, that's his species, isn't it?
You're thinking of Final Fantasy IX, but yes.
9.
Yeah, in Final Fantasy IX, Black Mages are a species... They are an artificial species designed to fight a war, and then there's like a little village of them who walk out on it and set up their own village in, some remote, misty continent. It's a cool little plotline. I like it.
That was like the last Final Fantasy game that was really trying to be that sort of pseudo-European fantasy, medieval fantasy. And that kind of has dropped away as a thing pretty much, at least as a AAA game, because like the amount of pseudo-European fantasy JRPGs has gone down significantly. That used to be the thing with JRPGs.
I lost. So we're probably not going to bother doing that again. I got too deep into it. Definitely need to come back at some other point, though.
It's not really a thing anymore as much. I think it still happens occasionally. Octopath Traveler, I think is kind of that, but it's definitely not a AAA thing. You can do it as a mobile game or a smaller Steam release. But if you're doing the big AAA, and the JRPGs in general have had to sort of try to emulate WRPGs a little bit, with moving away from turn-based combat, with the exception of Persona, which is very much its own thing.
Yeah.
I do like how Persona does not try to cater to Western audiences at all.
It's true. Like, you know, on the one hand, I don't want JRPGs to be stuck just trying to resemble themselves, right? Like, it's good that the genre is changing and evolving, but it's also, they're a very different kind of game from Western RPGs, and I want them to stay that way. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I want to have both.
I think Final Fantasy IX might have just been the last like AAA fantasy RPG that was like turn-based and also like trying to be sort of kind of European medieval.
Yeah.
After that, I think they all like try to do their own like because Final Fantasy in general goes for the more science fiction angle, and you get some
Right.
other JRPGs that are the AAA but are also they're not really doing the European fantasy thing at all. Like I guess also Dragon Quest does, but that's also pretty niche to Japan. It is Dragon Quest. I'm not thinking of a different title, am I?
I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Dragon Quest is the one you're thinking of, but
Let me just make sure real quick. Yeah, it's Dragon Quest.
Dragon Quest definitely sounded right.
There have been like JRPGs that sort of have experimented with settings for a while, like Wild Arms had its kind of quasi-Western setting, and then we mentioned Persona as like essentially a high school anime.
Yeah. And I mean, the bizarreness in setting that JRPGs get into is one of the things I love most about them. Like, Western RPGs tend to be glued to
Very
the fantasy, to the European fantasy setting pretty heavily. Fallout, I think, is the only major series that gets away from it. And even that has, you know, it's very much settled into its own rut.
And it was very much rooted in because there's a book specifically that was heavily the inspiration for the Fallout series. I think it was Damnation Alley. Yeah, it was Damnation Alley. It's sort of one of those early post-apocalyptic kind of scouts out the genre. One of the, depending on how you define the genre, one of the first post-apocalyptic novels is actually written by Mary Shelley in the early 1800s.
Really?
When you look up the title really quick. I think it's called The Last Man.
Any fewer is useless.
Let me make sure.
Well, if the princess is that important, we'll
Yeah, The Last Man.
find Jasmine and bring her to me.
A lot of the plague has wiped out most of life on the planet in The Last Man, which is written in 1826.
Too long. The heartless consume the careless.
Your concern is touching, but hardly necessary.
So we've had that idea in our culture for a while, longer than people actually realize. Like it's one of those things I think people assume is rooted in the post-nuclear age when we
Right.
first have that weapon. But you also have to remember Mary Shelley lived through the year 1816, which is also known as 1800 and froze to death, which was a volcano in, I want to say Indonesia, erupted and disrupted the seasonal cycle across the world. And it would snow in the middle of the summer, and there were crop failures. That's when she and Percy Shelley and Lord Byron hold up in the castle, and that's when you get Frankenstein, and you also get The Vampire by Polidori. But she did experience this quasi-apocalyptic event. Like, there There were crop failures all throughout Western Europe and North America because of the seasonal disruption.
I mean, if it was the early 19th century and it was snowing in the summer, I would assume it was the end of the world.
It's considered like the last great famine that happens in the West. The last real time that like you have a crop failure that sort of throws civilization asunder. Of course, now we're in a place that is not snowy at all.
I don't know, with the right supervolcano, anything is
That's
possible.
true. Again, I like how some of the Heartless have taken on a little Agrabah theme.
Yeah. Okay, I think I am like just barely high enough level to be able to manage this. But I may also be 3 levels behind, depending on whether or not I'm remembering the leveling progression properly.
Seems like the leveling progression is maybe a bit excessively tight for a game that's aimed at a younger audience.
I mean, I think the leveling progression might be a little bit excessively tight for a game that is playable to adults. Because
It's impossible. It's hard for me to tell again because I'm not playing it.
Well, what I'm saying though is that adults have shit to do.
Oh.
Whereas, like, for kids, expecting them to murder every last single creature they come across, which is still the behavior that I default to, but you know, I tend to leave a lot of games unfinished because of that.
Hello?
She doesn't sound like movie Jasmine.
She's not. Some of the voice
sounded
actors are
like
better than others.
A vague British accent, even.
A letter.
Not even like British, but like transatlantic.
Jasmine, allow me to find you more suitable company, my dear princess. These little rats won't do you, see.
Jasmine, run!
So here's a question, Chamomile.
Yes?
The boy who
What text did the story of Aladdin originate in?
See, I feel like you wouldn't be answering that. You wouldn't be asking me that if the obvious answer were correct. But, 1001 Arabian Nights is the answer that springs immediately to my mind. I never did get around to reading that. I've been meaning to for a while, though.
Well, that is the obvious answer, and you are correct about me not asking the question if the obvious answer was correct. It did not originate in the Knights. That was added by the first European translator.
See, at some point you gotta, like, you know, throw me a curveball. Be like, so where do you think, you know, the Star Wars universe originated from? And then it's like, well, it'd be with, you know, the first Star Wars movie in 1974, wouldn't it? And you'd be like, yeah. just checking. I think it was 1977, actually, but you know what I mean.
I do. And it's kind of like the process of translation in these sort of works. You get the pre-Islamic Arabian mythology that gets translated into an Islamic context. And then you get the European translation of the Islamic work, and then you get sort of this modern American capitalist version of those European translations. There's been a lot... certain stuff gets emphasized over other things. So like we're doing Aladdin, so at some point we're gonna obviously run into the genie, which is kind of like the Islamic concept of the jinn, but like in the West, we've really focused in on the wish-giving thing, which is not really the main component of the jinn as a part of folklore or religion.
There's also there is the limited wishes is a huge part of the genie. Anytime a genie comes up in a story, there will almost always be a limit to the number of wishes, which is not necessarily the case in, or at least in the translations I've read of Arabic, the original Arabic stories.
Well, jinn are just like, magical, so they've got magical powers, but it's not just a wish. Like, if the wish is in like, I will do you a service using my magical ability, it's not like just I can just make anything happen.
Yeah, it's like, I'll do you 3 favors, and because I have incredible magical power, they can be basically anything, go crazy.
But it's not even necessarily like you run into a jinn, you're not necessarily going to have a story about wishes. Like, that's a thing in the West to be focused on. Like, there's one story in the 1001 Nights. I don't remember everything that happens in it, but this guy digs up a jar, and he opens the jar, and there was a jinn in it, and it's just like, I'm going to eat you. And he convinces it not to eat him, but like, it wasn't obligated to grant him wishes.
Right. And it's all, I forget which this was. I know I read this somewhere, but I forget where it was, so I don't even know if it's accurate. But I remember there was a story I read where there was a ring that had a jinn bound to it, who just had to, because he had been bound by, some sorcerer or by God or whatever, King Solomon, I don't know, he had to grant wishes to whoever wore the ring. Just any amount of wishes.
It's also like, in Islamic religion, Solomon's a sorcerer, and he had jinn who served him, because the jinn, as I've seen them described, so in Islamic religion you have the seen world of humans, that's the created world, and then you have the unseen world of the sort of religious sphere of Allah, but then jinn sort of sit between those two worlds. They're unseen creatures of the seen world. And the fun thing about like jinn that I always liked was like, it's specific in Islamic religion that jinn can be any religion. There are Christian jinn, there are Jewish jinn. And here's our jinn.
Yeah, here we see Aladdin making excellent use of his wishes, getting rid of some random heartless that we were just slaughtering a minute ago. But then a second wave arrived.
It's this very common thing in folklore, this idea of like a hidden people, some other people who are not part of the seen world, not part of the normal order of creation. You see it in, most famously in Western folklore is the fairies and the elves, but you also see like...
Right, from Celtic folklore, you get the Sidhe in the unseen world of Onwin.
You're doing that on purpose.
Yes.
You're killing... This is your vengeance, isn't it?
Oh yes, I haven't forgotten the monkey's paw thing.
I'm gonna give you Fang Requiem's phone number.
And I mean, when you do, I will make any effort at all to pronounce these things correctly.
The explanation in Victorian times for stuff like the Sidhe, I guess is what we're saying.
I mean, I am almost worried about reinforcing the incorrect one, because most people have no idea how these things are pronounced. These are not common words.
The she.
Yes.
The Victorian explanation for things like the she and the jinn is that they were a earlier people that was displaced by a newly arrived people. So in the case of the she, it was the belief that this was a pre-Indo-European people that were wiped out by the Celts. But the thing that we've run into, is you run into these people, this folkloric creature, pretty much all over the world, even in places where the current inhabitants are the first inhabitants. So, in Hawaii, the first people to inhabit Hawaii are the indigenous Hawaiians. They were the first people there, and they have the story of the Menehune, who are this hidden people. And you can go, there are different explanations for where this came from in Hawaii. Like, I've heard one explanation is that sometimes Japanese sailors might have washed up in Hawaii, or it might have been contamination from European settlers of like European folklore. Or you can try to go further back and be like, well, it was back before they even got to Hawaii, when the sort of the proto-Polynesian people. But we see this pop up everywhere.
As an alternative theory, maybe people just anthropomorphize concepts.
Yeah, because like you also see it in Iceland. Like, the first people in Iceland are the Icelandic people. There wasn't an indigenous people in Iceland before the Icelandic people, and they did bring the idea of the elf from Scandinavia. But it's like they also brought it and they inserted it into this place where there definitely was not a separate culture that they encountered. And you also start getting into sort of like a sort of just so version of anthropology, where you're like speculating about stuff that took place tens of thousands of years before written culture. You're kind of doing just guesswork.
Oh yeah, and so I can't remember if we talked about this on camera or not, because it is to do with Greek mythology, so naturally we are discussing this in Aladdin's world. But there are the harpies. They are the spirits of sea winds, and so, you know, if you are a Greek on a boat and something is blown out of your hands and into the sea, then you would say that the harpies had snatched it from you in their invisible talons. And like, I don't think anyone has ever tried to claim that the harpies are, you know, secretly displaced indigenous people that the main Greek people conquered or destroyed. But that's the kind of thing where it's like, that's the kind of thing that humans invent an invisible creature for.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the wind kicks up and blows something valuable out of your hands and into the water, and you want to blame something for that, so you make up a little gremlin.
And the thing you run into with the she specifically is we now know that version of the Celtification of the British Isles is probably not correct. There's not any evidence of an invasion, even a prehistorical invasion of Great Britain by the Celts. What we now know, the people who live in the British Isles, if you have two grandparents who were born in the British Isles, you can trace your ancestry back to the first inhabitants of the British Isles. We've done the genetic evidence. And with the Celts in particular, there's been some linguistic and archaeological and genetic studies where we now think that the Celtification of Western Europe happened peacefully. It was probably a lingua franca in Western Europe, and also because what we used to think was that the Celts originated in Eastern Europe, probably around Hungary. But based on sort of linguistic evidence, we know that the Celtic language has been around a lot longer than we thought it has. So probably it actually originated in Western Europe and spread east. And what we based it on was, like, Herodotus says, he describes the Celts as being around Hungary. And we thought, okay, they started in Hungary and went west, but no, they probably started in the west and went east. And by the time Herodotus is writing about them, that's when they just arrived in Hungary. And you also, part of the issue was that people were taking the Book of Invasions, which was a medieval Irish text, way too literally. And the Book of Invasions describes a process by which you have these various invasions of Ireland by people that eventually the Milesians show up, and that's the Irish people, and they drive the other people underground. But what people miss is this is an Irish monk writing in like the year 1100. He's not actually writing Celtic mythology or Irish mythology. It's been centuries at this point since anyone believed in the Irish gods, and he was specifically trying to euhemerize it. He was trying to take what he knew and turn it into a historical narrative. So we don't know how much of this was actually something the Celts believed. We don't know
Well, he also
because the idea was that
Christianized
like
it, which you can tell because there's a couple of times where what is clearly the same story happens like 2 or 3 times, spaced far apart in the timeline, because he apparently liked both versions of the telling and decided to just include them both as separate invasions.
or like the Milesians are descended from Moses in the Book of Invasions, which obviously the Irish people are not descended from Egyptians. But like, so people would point to the Sidhe because the Sidhe are the Fae, but they're also these pre-Celtic mounds that are all over the British Isles, and they're like, oh, the Sidhe are associated with these mounds because they were the pre-Celtic people who got pushed out. But like, as it turns out, the pre-Celtic people would eventually become the Celtic people. So if the Sidhe are the pre-Celtic people, this is the Celtic people making a story about themselves. They've forgotten who they used to be and have turned themselves into fairies, essentially. And honestly, if you read like the actual, like some of these texts, it's really clear the process. This is really like, it's the Irish gods becoming fairies, I think is the obvious explanation for some of this. Like, this explanation has come under a little fire from like the anti-Celticist side, but like, I don't think the anti-Celticists are necessarily have a stronger case as they think they do. Like, I do think the Celticists tend to overstate stuff, and some of that does deserve to get knocked down. But I feel like the criticism I've heard of the anti-Celticists is the anti-Celticists want to pretend that Ireland springs up fully formed out of the ocean in the Middle Ages with the arrival of St. Patrick. And like, even if like the Celtic arguments are sort of overemphasizing the continuity of Celtic culture, like, there's still stuff unique to Ireland. Ireland existed before the arrival of Christianity, and it had its own separate culture before that happened, and when Christianity arrives, it's going to take on unique aspects because it's mixing with this separate culture. Like some of the like one of the possible etymologies of the word leprechaun is little stooping Lou, which is Lou was one of the Celtic gods. But you know, I think the small gods theory, essentially, that sometimes these are like pre-Christian gods that have been forced into a different context by the arrival of Christianity. And also just this is a way to explain, when you live in an enchanted world where you can't explain things through science, this is a pretty easy way to explain why things happen. Which is what you were talking about with the harpies. Right.
And there's something that people don't always grasp. There comes a tipping point in history, which is relatively recent, only a few centuries ago, when you can expect to, like, you can expect to have an explanation for a natural phenomenon. Like, you are more likely than not going to be able to explain a natural phenomenon in your life. And for most of human history, this was not true. For most of human history, the majority of natural phenomenon were inexplicable. And once that tips over, like, it makes a big difference to the way people perceive the world. Like, mysticism and myth and enchantment get pushed into the corners, whereas previously they were very much front and center.
We kind of touched upon this with the Alice in Wonderland episode, but it's like, until the world is disenchanted, you can't have fantasy as a genre, because the fantasy genre is about enchantment, and if the regular world is enchanted, if like magic and dragons and fairies exist in the real world, you obviously don't need to create a separate world to tell stories about that stuff.
Yeah, Fairyland wasn't, and it's again, like, there's fairies are all over the world, so I'm positive there are exceptions. Specific stories or specific cultures. But I mean, this is a decent use of a wish.
One wish left.
Just
You're making this really easy, you know.
You are.
Also, that is like the worst Robin Williams impression.
Yeah, no, there's a terrible Robin Williams. I mean, I feel bad for anyone who has to play the genie. whether they're trying to do a Robin Williams impression or not, because
So
he's
iconic.
just, yeah, he is
I bid you all
impossible to mimic. But yeah, most fairylands are not like, through portals to another dimension the way they are now. Most fairylands, in the time when people actually believed in them, were that forest over there. And it would totally have supernatural properties. Like, you go in there and the paths bend in on themselves and now you can't get out. That kind of thing. But that wasn't a property of another plane of existence, D&D style. That was a property of that forest over there.
It's like in A Midsummer Night's Dream, they just go into the woods, and the woods is where fairies live. In The Tempest, they just arrive on an island in the middle of the sea, and there's a wizard, because that's where a wizard lives. They live in isolated islands.
Right.
And then there are just ghosts in Denmark.
Yeah.
Or then even in Macbeth, witches are a thing, so you can just have witches in Scotland.
Yeah, and the gods live on Olympus, and when Bellerophon tries to fly to the top, he gets struck down by lightning for his hubris. He does not have to open up some portal, right? Which, journeys into the underworld are sometimes interpreted this way by modern audiences. If you prefer that version, then sure, Greek myths are fictional, and you can interpret them however you want. But what I'm getting at, though, is that a lot of people don't realize that this is a modification of the myth, right? They don't think this is a preferred version, they think this is just how it is. But it is not. The Greek underworld is just underground.
Yep.
It's, there's not some magic spell you have to do that involves going underground. It just is underground.
This is even true in Christianity. This isn't something just in polytheistic religions. Heaven is past the moon, and when I say it's past the moon, I mean that literally. If you were able to get past the moon, you'd be able to meet God and all the angels. And it wasn't really an issue for most of history because we couldn't even really see past the moon. But in Cyrano de Bergerac's The Man in the Moon, it features the main character. He gets in a hot air balloon and flies up to the moon, and he talks to an angel because, the moon is the limits of the physical world. And with the whole alternative dimensions thing is what you see in folklore. It's re-enchantment. It's a way to look at our world where most things are explainable and still have this sort of magical element. So we know now, obviously, just past the moon, they're just space. So obviously, heaven's an alternative dimension. That's how you explain it.
Right.
We know you can't have a physical creature that's made out of air, so you can't explain demons as though, they're made out of air. So you're they're made of some sort of spiritual substance that's not explainable in physical terms at all. Re-enchantment. A fun.
With Lovecraft, you can see sort of the last corners where enchantment can hide being used, and there are some places left like that in the world, but there's so few that it becomes a little bit incredulous that no, the enchantment is hiding here in the Mariana Trench, guys. The last place we checked, that's where the enchantment is. It comes across as a little bit desperate, even though, I can't tell you for sure that it's not true. We haven't really fully explored the deep places of the ocean. But
even with Tarzan, we got into that a little. We didn't really talk about this, but it's Tarzan, it's parts of the world are still unexplored. They still are subject to enchantment. You can have these monkeys who are really basically missing link type hominids, and you can have somebody get lost and be not encounter humans for 20 years. But now even the jungles have been disenchanted.
It's there's a whole lot of snakes in there, but we pretty much mapped them. Although there are some bits of the Amazon that remain Like, obviously we have satellite images, but... yeah, for the most part, the Amazon is just untamed wilderness, which is kind of neat, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, you know, the 5 to 10% of the Earth that we haven't explored just so happened to be where all the fairies were hiding. We reach this tipping point where more of the world is explained than not, and so it becomes harder to believe that magic exists in the unexplored parts of the world. Because, you know, it would have to just so happen to have been in the one part of the world we didn't explore, which... yeah, it's just not credible the way it used to be.
You even see this a little with, like, early science fiction, because a lot of it starts out, the setting is Mars, instead of, like, some far-off other unexplored planet. Like, the Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, we go to Mars and we find this Martian civilization. Or, John Carter of Mars does the same thing, basically. But now Mars is disenchanted. It's just rocks.
Yeah, pretty much the entire solar system. And so you still occasionally get people doing, like, you know, on Alpha Centauri, or whatever, you know, relatively nearby stars, having alien civilizations there. But, you know, with SETI, it's becoming increasingly unlikely that any alien civilization is that nearby. And it's starting to look doubtful whether or not there are any aliens anywhere in our entire galaxy.
Very depressing.
Yeah, there are, which the science on that, by the way, is by no means settled, right? Like, there is still plenty of unexplored possibilities for a turnaround there. But, it's time for the best part of the game, potion restocking.
Giving it all to Goofy. Or I guess maybe Aladdin.
Yeah, Goofy and Aladdin. Which, you know, once you got rid of Donald, you can go ahead and give items to your party members. But,
does he get better as the series progresses?
I think he is better in Kingdom Hearts 2. He is much better in Chain of Memories, on account of he doesn't exist. He's basically just not in combat, ever.
Now, Chain of Memories is the one where there's some sort of time travel paradox that removes Donald from existence, and Sora, the entire game, is debating whether he actually wants to bring him back or not.
I mean, on the one hand, no, but you are shockingly close to the plot. Like, and I mean, you know, it's shocking mainly because that was such a specific and bizarre guess. So to even get close is kind of a shock, but still, like, there are noticeable similarities.
The big Heartless are even more adorable in their little outfits. So Aladdin, we're into the Disney Renaissance. I don't remember which one this is in the progress, because I think the first one is The Little Mermaid.
Yeah, the first one is The Little Mermaid. Aladdin happens fairly early on.
Then you get that
like
sort of like...
third.
You get sort of that period where it's technically the Renaissance, but the movies are not as great. Like, I feel like you get, like, because it's Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King.
Although you do have Pocahontas coming out, like the Lion King Pocahontas set is sort of a transition point there.
Yeah, Pocahontas and the Hunchback of Notre Dame are sort of,
I mean, Pocahontas...
I think Mulan is legitimately good.
Oh yeah, Mulan is actually, like, the quality spikes back upward, but that's become more of an unusual thing. Whereas, like, you know, that used to be the norm for the Disney Renaissance. But by the time Mulan comes out,
It's
sort of
unusual.
it's like a breath of fresh air. At that
And then,
point,
like-
things like Hercules and Tarzan have become more the norm.
And then, like, you get, like, I think The Princess and the Frog is, like, the last gasp.
And that is like
Before-
several years after the Renaissance is basically over. Is a
It's not even
throwback to the
part of it-
Renaissance style, but
It feels very like it could be the part of the Renaissance, even though it isn't. And it's kind
Yeah,
of like the last gasp of, like, the Renaissance style before they
Princess and the
move on
Frog
to just
was
CGI.
Disney intentionally going back to, it was a back to basics thing. Was that was the idea of the Disney of the Princess and the Frog, was it was supposed to be a Disney movie that feels like how Disney movies used to feel.
Yeah. It's really too bad. It was a good movie.
Oh, it really was.
They're
There we are, finally.
they're
Getting on
actually
top
gonna
of this guy's head is always such a hassle.
they're gonna redesign Splash Mountain to make it Princess and the Frog themed.
I mean, neat. It's a good movie. It deserves more attention. I mean, it has its problems, but what Disney movie doesn't?
Yeah. So I guess, like, is Mulan the last one before they go into that really dark age, like stuff like the cow movie that name I can't even remember.
I do think Mulan is the last one before they start getting into Home on the Range and Chicken Little, which again, very good DreamWorks movie. I don't know why Disney made it.
I have not seen it.
Yeah, it is an
You'll
above
be,
average
like-
DreamWorks movie, but yeah.
I wonder what happened. Like, I guess part of it, like, the guy who was behind a lot of the Renaissance, the songwriter, dies of HIV at some point in the early 90s. And it's one of those things where it's like, it seems like he must have been, like, the main force behind it, because once he's gone, like, there's a huge quality drop. And they're able to recapture it occasionally, but they're not getting it as consistently as they did.
Which they did eventually, once they got into, all CGI all the time, it became a very different style. It became like a very meta, Disney commenting on Disney kind of style. But it was good.
James
Granted.
Somerton is a YouTuber who he discusses the Disney Renaissance and queer coding and the work that songwriter did. He does a pretty good video about it that people should watch.
Can we look up the name of this songwriter real quick?
I'm going to.
Okay, because
Yeah.
like I can never remember anyone's goddamn name, but I do like to credit the people who did good work. I'm just really bad at remembering names, and I never know any like actors or directors' names or anything. Gotta get that second eye. This is the most annoying boss fight.
I'm just trying to figure out what to Google to bring up his name.
I mean,
Ashton?
shouldn't just the...
I think it's Howard Ashman. And he dies in 91.
Oh, 91. That's very early in the Renaissance. Are you sure it's him?
I would have to watch the James Somerton video to confirm.
Maybe
He wins a lot of awards for stuff after his death. Like, he wins awards for Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. So he was involved even at that point.
Oh, so he did work on Aladdin then.
He did work on Aladdin, yeah.
Then he might be the guy then, because Aladdin, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Beauty and the Beast did sort of set the tone for it. There was Lion King afterwards, which was a fair bit after, but That's
Yeah,
right.
he received a second Academy Award after his death, and his partner accepted it in his stead. It's very tragic, but James Somerton in one of his videos talks about how there's a certain amount of gay aesthetic that gets into that is part of the Disney Renaissance. I think you see it more in. I feel like you see it a lot in The Little Mermaid. More so than Aladdin. Like, people have talked about the queer coding with the Jafar, certainly, and that's something that happens with a lot of Disney villains.
I had not heard of that about Jafar.
Yeah, people will make jokes about it, but like he's kind of, he's physically weak. He's kind of effete. He's kind of, he's sneaky. He's in a dress, essentially. Like, it's a robe, but like in modern Western culture, we'll interpret robes as being dresses. There are very few Disney villains who you cannot make a case for being queer-coded. Like, I think Shang Yu in Mulan, and maybe like Frollo in Hunchback don't really come off as being queer-coded, but I guess Oogie Boogie doesn't either, but it's always weird for me to think of him as being a Disney villain.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't even released under the Disney brand. The Nightmare Before Christmas, they like made a different studio name to release it under, and then they only put it under the Disney studio name when it, got huge.
Yeah. Like, it always makes me... It always weirds me out, like, thinking about the fact that Nightmare Before Christmas comes up in Kingdom Hearts, because I don't think of it as a Disney movie at all.
It's kind of like how Anastasia isn't a Disney movie. It's it's the best Disney film made by someone other than Disney.
Yeah, well, it is now that they own Fox.
It's true. I didn't even think about that. Oh man, so when is Anastasia coming to Kingdom Hearts? Because if there's any... dang it. If there's any villain who can replace Maleficent as, like, the head bad guy...
Rasputin.
It's Rasputin.
Definitely. You'd have Rasputin and Dr. Fossilier and actually introduce some new villains. That's still only 2 people for your council, though.
It's true. I just imagine, Dr. Facilier sitting at that... And I have no idea which one of us is pronouncing his name correctly for the record. But I'm imagining him, sitting at that empty table. And then, like, Rasputin just kind of comes in, sits down, like one of them coughs. Is it just us?
I guess maybe, like, the owl from the Raps of Nim? Like, there's not a lot left.
I don't think that was Disney. Wasn't that...
Well,
Don Bluth got his start in Disney, but I think that was after he went and made his own company.
Yeah, but he also did Anastasia, so I assume if they own Anastasia now, they must own all his stuff, right?
Do they? I'm not sure.
I don't know. I've got no clue. I'm gonna look up Fox Studios animated movies to see what Fox villains can now be in the Disney Kingdom. Sony, if you're listening to this, and I know you are, we're about to for Kingdom Hearts 4.
Coming 2032.
Okay, there's not a lot of them. There's only 5.
Oh boy.
So there's Adventures from the Book of Virtues, which I have never heard of.
Yeah, not ringing any bells.
Oh, it's based off the William Bennett book, so probably don't want to touch that. Anastasia, which we talked about. The Prince of Egypt. So, I guess God can show up as a Disney villain.
I want an Angel of Death boss fight.
honestly, like, that one song, what is it called?
The
The
10
Plagues song. The 10 Plagues is basically a villain song.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, in the context of the story, it doesn't quite work just because, you know, the Judeo-Christian God is all-powerful, and he doesn't have to mess around with this plague shit. He can just teleport the Hebrews out of captivity. But, you know, if you ignore the context and just take the song by itself...
I send a plague upon the wind such as the world has never seen, on every stalk, on every leaf, until there's nothing left of green.
I mean, I do really like that song as just like, you're fucking with my people, and I'm not gonna have that.
There's an animator, Nina Paley, who did her version of the Exodus story and sort of examining sort of the uglier aspects of it. And she did this one, her version of when the angel of death kills all the firstborn children, and how actually horrible and tragic it is. And she has a lot of stuff of like public domain and like pushing at the bounds of fair use as well. So she has this one about sort of like the history of Palestine/Israel, like as a place of conflict, and appropriating this song from like, I think it's a Charlton Heston movie called "This Land Is Mine." She also did Sidhe Sings the Blues. I would actually not recommend checking her out because she's one of those people who did a mass drop. She's had a mass drop thing that we don't need to go into, but like, it's one of those unfortunate things where she did good work and then she had her mass drop moment.
And then at some point she turned evil.
Yeah.
This whole... I guess it's a dungeon. It's one of the only dungeons in Kingdom Hearts. But yeah, this whole Cave of Wonders area is super annoying because there are, you know, a big chunk of Heartless in here, and also if you fall off a platform while fighting them, the entire group will have respawned when you get back.
Yikes.
Yeah, so you have to defeat them all in one go.
So the Prince of Egypt, then you get Bartok the Magnificent, which I think is a sequel to Anastasia, and I don't think anyone has watched.
Yeah, it's some kind of spin-off.
And then you get Titan AE, which I also don't think I've watched.
Oh my god, no, Titan AE was amazing.
Oh?
Yes. I mean, it was visually stunning, which I think is good enough, but... And it's not... The plot and characters were not bad. Now, that is the best thing you can say about them, but still. Like, you know, they did not detract from the visual experience, which was incredible.
Well, it did lose money at the box office, and it was the last movie that Fox Animation made.
Yeah, well, and I mean, you know, I kind of get Treasure Planet vibes from that a little bit. Granted, Treasure Planet was just all-around amazing.
So it looks like after that they turn into Blue Sky Studios. So, Ice Age, Robots, Ice Age Meltdown. What?
Robots was actually really good.
Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who, Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs, Rio, Ice Age Continental Drift, Epic, Rio 2, the Peanuts movie, Ice Age Collision Course, Ferdinand, and Spies in Disguise. So I think, you know, we've got some good choices for villains, right?
I want to make a joke about Ice Age villains, but I can't remember any.
I assume we just fight a glacier or something. And I guess Lucy from Peanuts can join the Council of Evil.
I'm just imagining her in her the psychiatrist is in pose, sitting at the council. And everyone else is, like, faintly embarrassed to have her there. There's, like, an actual 7-year-old child on the Council of Evil.
Oh, looks like they did Fern Gully too, but they didn't do the first Fern Gully. Who did the first Fern Gully?
So I assume that this was a sequel that deconstructed the conceits of the original Fern Gully, but then wasn't really finished and was kind of released in an alpha state.
It does seem like, no, it seems like it's some weird cross thing that I can't figure out who I can blame for the movie.
I did not see Fern Gully.
I mean, Hexus is an amazing villain and also not really appropriate for a children's movie. It's, Tim Curry was going a little too hard on Hexus. Like, this movie, the main villain in this movie aimed at 10-year-olds is maybe a little bit too sexy. Also, it's a little too much for somebody who is made out of pollution. You could have Hexus on the Council of Villains.
I am not high enough level to be fighting these big guys.
We're gonna have to do the Coliseum.
I mean, it's mainly just an issue of they're invincible from the front, which means you have to dodge around them from the side, which means if you can't bring them down fairly quick, they get annoying to fight. Because you keep having to run around them. Yeah, I do feel like I'm... And I felt the same way in Deep Jungle, and it worked out. But I do feel like I am a level or two behind where I should be. Maybe more. Anyway, when I say when I should be, what I mean is in order to be able to face roll this game so that I can have a conversation at the same time as playing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you caught it earlier, because we were in the middle of a more interesting discussion, but now that's peered out. Jasmine is one of our 7 Disney princesses who are princesses of heart.
Makes sense.
And, we retroactively get that Alice, therefore, must also have been one for some reason. And it does get confirmed later on, too, so that's not speculation, that's just, yep, Alice is... Come on. There we go. Alice gets to be a princess for some reason. But, apparently there is a mysterious door that, only all 7 princesses of heart can open.
So, I'm guessing the Princesses of Heart are gonna be, Alice, obviously, Jasmine, probably Sailor Moon, Susan Sontag, obviously, Elmo.
So yeah, the first few are real obvious, with like, Sailor Moon and Susan Sontag and stuff. Then you do kind of get into, some of them are harder just because there's so many to pick from, and it's winnowing that list of 12 or 13 Disney princesses down to just 7. Where it's like, do you add in Lucy from I, Lou, Bless You?
The Vampire Lestat's obviously going to be one of them. And is that where your cameo comes in? Are you a Princess of Heart?
I mean, I feel like it would be spoilers to say one way or the other, but
Okay.
I'm not saying it.